Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Indian School of Business and the Nehru Center, it's my great pleasure in welcoming you all to this very wonderful evening here in London. This is, as you all know, a celebratory event to celebrate 2 decades of ISB, the Indian School of Business. We are very thankful to the Nehru Center, Shri Amish Tripathi, the director, and everybody else for their for hosting us this evening. India-UK relations have withstood the test of time. Our Honorable Prime Minister has described it as a living bridge of people, language, ideas, culture, education, and much more. ISB is proud of its steadily deepening relationships with various constituents in the UK. The Indian School of Business has been unique, both in the way it has come into being and in the way it has grown over the course of its past 2 decades. Born out of the collective vision of several stalwarts of industry and global thought leaders from academia, ISB has been distinct in many aspects from the word go. Today's event, we will have Dean Madan Pilutla, the Dean of Indian School of Business, say a few words about ISB and present sort of a very mini version of the state of the school. And before that, we'll have a short video about ISB. And then we'll have Professor Krishnamurthy Subramanian from ISB sort of give his keynote address and a panel discussion featuring Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, a founding member of the ISB Executive Board, and Professor Subbu, moderated by Shri Amish Tripathi. I also want to recognize and welcome Sir Dominic Asquith, the former British High Commissioner to India, here this evening, who's amidst us. And just as a small, anecdotal thing, he's one of the ambassadors in India who's actually been to both our campuses many times over. So, Sir Dominic, thank you very much, and pleasure to have you here with us this evening. And for all those of you celebrating Onam today, happy Onam. And with those few words, I want to sort of now, invite you all to watch this short movie about ISB. Thank you.
एशिया के टॉप बिजनेस स्कूलों में से एक है। आईएसबी से निकलने वाले जो प्रोफेशनल्स हैं, वे देश के बिजनेस को गति दे रहे हैं, बड़ी-बड़ी कंपनियों का मैनेजमेंट संभाल रहे हैं। आइकॉन्स निर्माण में उनकी भूमिका रही है। ये आईएसबी के लिए उपलब्धि तो है ही, पूरे देश के लिए गर्व का विषय भी है।
A school with this kind of capability, a school with this kind of resources, it has to aim really, really high. So the goals will be that high. We'll set those goals that high, but we'll also come up with a plan about what are the steps that we need to be taking so that we'll be achieving those goals in 5 years and set ourselves up so that we become a world-beating business school in the not-so-distant future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You heard Dean Pilutla talk about the goals and the future, but I now invite him here, since he's here with us in person, to share some of those with you all today and also talk a little bit about how the school has progressed over the past 2 decades. Dean Pilutla.
Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for braving the rain and coming here to help us celebrate ISB at 20 years. This, I know you're very busy people. I know that you have lots of things to do, but it means a lot to us that you come here and you celebrate with us. You have a great evening planned, so there are some star speakers, one just following me. Subbu is going to follow me in a few minutes, so I'm not going to keep you away from him. And a very distinguished panel so you have Amish here, you have Sunil Munjal, who is a founding board member of the school. So let me start off by saying that my association with the school is 20 plus years. About 20 odd years ago, I was sitting in a pub just outside London Business School. London Business School has a pub on its premises. You should know that, So it's called the Windsor. So I was sitting there, I was having a drink, and Sumantra Ghoshal walked in. And Sumantra was, those of you who knew Sumantra, a very charismatic figure, a bit of a demigod. He had a presence, and when he entered a room, all eyes went towards him. So my friend Anand and I, we were looking at him. We were sitting with someone else. He just walks up to us and he asks me. He says, "Do you want to be involved with the ISB?" And I'd heard about the ISB, I'd heard who the people were behind the ISB, and also the different faculty members who were involved there. So I felt very honored. I immediately said yes. I had no clue what he wanted me to teach. I had no clue whether they were going to pay me any money. I had no clue whether I had to buy my own ticket to go there to teach. And none of those things, I just said yes to Sumantra. I'm so glad I did, so I'm so glad I did. I went to ISB in December of 2001, the founding batch. There are a few of you from the founding batch here. So I taught there the first batch the founding batch at ISB, and I would rate that as among my most amazing teaching experiences. Going back to India, teaching your own people, people who understand your jokes, people who kind of get you, was something that I enjoyed so much. So my association began then, and it continued all the way till now. At the time when I said yes, knowing fully well the kind of the founding conditions of the school, but it was still an idea, right? So this was an idea where there are a group of very talented people decided that they were going to build a world-beating business school in India, but there was no structure, there was no physical infrastructure. There was the curriculum was just being designed, so it was just an idea at that point in at time. But they had the audacity to believe that they were going to build a world-beating school, and here we are today. So I did not expect then when I first went there. I was honored then to be asked to come and teach there. I'm even more honored when I was named the dean of the school about a year ago. I didn't expect to be standing here and talking to you about ISB at 20 and about this glorious institution. A lot has happened in the 20 years, there are many different people that we need to thank. Obviously, the vision of the founding board. Obviously, the people who, the faculty members from the Indian diaspora, people from, we all know people from Kellogg, we know people from Wharton, people from the London Business School, but also you had people from Chicago, from Stanford, from just about any school, name a good school in the United States. They were involved in the inception of the school. So we owe a debt of gratitude to these people that they started off this great institution, but also the institution grew thanks to the efforts, the passion, and the immense hard work that the employees and the faculty in the ISB have put over the last 20 years. Today, I do believe, that we are a world-class school. We are the top-ranked school in India, but we want to be something a lot better. So the goal for us is a lot better. So let me just go down a little and talk to you about what the school is like at this point in time. Just give you a glimpse. You saw that in the video. You saw a lot of the different things that we do, but let me just give you a glimpse and then say, what is the future? What does the future hold for us? So ISB was founded with a vision to be a world-class school from day one. I had the pleasure of listening to Pramath. Pramath Sinha was the founding dean, regales people with a lot of the different stories about the founding of ISB. But this is something that he said which I find to be quite profound. For people who are trying to build world-class institutions, he said excellence is not scalable. You have to be excellent from day one. You can build in terms of the numbers that you're educating, you can build in terms of the imprint that you're going to be having, but you need to bake in excellence into the DNA from day one. And that's what I believe that the school really, the architects of the ISB, they believed in that, and that's what they did right from the beginning. I do think that the school has stayed true to this vision by consistently setting and bettering the benchmarks that it is setting for itself. I believe now that we are a flag bearer for management institutions in India that want to be research-led. So we are the flag bearer for that, and I do think that our founding conditions have helped us considerably in doing that. So research has always been the backbone of our vision to be a leader in management education. So we are the only business school that is ranked in the FT. So we're looking in terms of being ranked in research. We are the only school that has been ranked in the FT. All of our faculty, we have 66 resident faculty. We have 200 plus visiting faculty. All of them, if you think about the combined knowledge base that these people are generating, they have, they publish in some of the top journals, and the expertise that we bring under one roof in the ISB is somewhat unparalleled. In addition to the fact that, there is a lot of very, very high quality research that is being done in India, in the ISB, the thing that I just want to highlight is something that ISB, the best researchers in ISB are exemplars of. They're trained in the world's best business schools, right? So they're trained in the world's best business schools, best social science programs, and so on. But when they come to India, they look at India as a laboratory where they can study problems that are relevant to a huge percentage of the world population. We are a big country, but the problems that we are solving in India are probably also relevant to a lot of economies which are, not developed economies, which are poorer economies where information itself and data itself is a little hard to gather. Policies themselves need to be tweaked, policies need to be changed. So India becomes the laboratory in which our researchers, our top researchers, they do their research, they publish them in world-class journals. But this research is something that gets picked up and can be used by a lot of different parts of the world, which have had usually a developed economy focus, a Western kind of a focus. We also in the ISB, right from the beginning, we've always believed in, we're talking about India relevance, we're talking about global eminence, okay? So this is the motto that we have. So we want to do India relevant work, but we want to be globally respected. But when we're talking about India relevant work, we've also in ISB very consciously, we've set up research centers and research institutes. These serve as a bridge between academia, that's who we are, practitioners, policymakers, and industry in order not just to foster high quality research, but also to drive societal impact. So that's what our centers and our research institutes, they're doing a lot of. So we have 9 of them, and they're doing a lot of that. Our own flagship postgraduate program in management, it ranks number 32 in the Financial Times and number 1 in India in the Financial Times ranking. I, for one, my faculty colleagues, the board definitely, we had a board meeting today, and they told me, and I agree, they're just preaching to the converted. We are not happy with this ranking. 32 is not a ranking that we believe that a school of our capability, that is not where we want to peg ourselves. So we want to be among a handful of the schools that are out there in the world that people will consider to be world beating. So if people are talking about 5, 10 schools, we want to be talked about in those 5, 10 schools. So our ranking is good, but it is not good enough given who we are and the capabilities that we have. We now offer about 11 programs in management. It cuts across different seniority levels, domain specializations. We have programs. We have a program, the MBA equivalent, the PGP program. We have a program for people who come from family businesses and are going to go back to family businesses. We also have the equivalent of a PhD program, because in addition to serving the needs of industry, in addition to trying to train people who are going to become entrepreneurs, we also want to train people who will go into academia and spread the kind of rigor that we practice in the research that we do. We want them to spread it in India. Our exec education is growing, so our reach is really, really good. So we have what we're calling a full stack executive education model. Our relationships with different companies is not transactional. We don't want to do a one-off kind of an exec education program. We want to be participants in their change. We want to be participants in their growth, and we want to help them innovate and become world-beating companies. So the Financial Times, again, ranks us number 38 in the world and number 1 in India when they're talking about our custom exec education rankings. Again, rankings that we're proud of, but something that we want to do a lot more of. About a year ago, when I took over the deanship, and you saw this again at the end, what I said is that, our intent is to leverage our research capabilities and the immense knowledge of our faculty so that we can enhance our school's outreach and engage with external stakeholders. So what I hope to do as a result of that is that we as a school will become the role model for what business schools in a developing world should look like. As we are embarking on our third decade, I think, we are doing quite a lot with the government. As a prime example, we are the first B school, actually the first educational institution which was selected by the Capacity Building Commission of India. It's the nodal body for skill development, knowledge and skill development of the nation's civil services. We became their first knowledge partner, so we're very proud of that. But then as a result of that, we've had a whole series of engagements. We have increased dialogue with policymakers, administrators, and industry to offer ISB's research capabilities for capacity building, skilling, training, knowledge development, and nation building. You just heard what the Prime Minister said, okay, and you also saw the tweet. So there cannot be a more ringing endorsement than when the Prime Minister of India, he says, one of the reasons that the world knows that India means business is institutions like the ISB. What more can you think of as a ringing endorsement of the kind of work we as a school have been doing? So two more things about impact that I want to say. We're committed to doing things in India. As part of the national education policy, which we're very excited by, we think that there are a lot of good things that are going to come out of it. But as part of it, what we also want to do is engage the knowledge that we are creating, engage the kind of courses that we are creating in the services of helping MBA programs in India who do not have the capability to develop their own pedagogy or deliver their pedagogy. So this is something that we want to do quite a lot of. The final thing that I want to say is that we have recommitted to the idea that ISB is a school for entrepreneurs. Under the leadership of Bhagwan Chaudhary, Bhagwan has been teaching right from the very beginning, since the inception of ISB. Each year he's been coming and he's been teaching at the ISB. I'm delighted that he's there with us. But what under him, under his leadership, there is a body that we've created which is called iVenture at ISB. And iVenture is stitching together an ecosystem for entrepreneurship in India. There are a lot of exciting things that iVenture is doing. They're holding a conference in London in October. Those of you interested in understanding what is going on in entrepreneurship in India, I would strongly urge you to attend that conference that iVenture at ISB is doing, along with the Wheeler Institute at the London Business School. I'm just going to conclude by thanking two sets of people. First, our alumni. Thank you for doing so well as business leaders and founders of organizations across the globe. What I would say that, there are a whole load of achievements. A bunch of you have become CXOs. You've founded more than 600 organizations. We have more than 600 founders among our 13,500 alumni. We also have among the 105 plus unicorns, whichever way you measure it, right? So there are 105 plus unicorns in India right now. 11 of them have either founders or co-founders from India. For a young school and just one small school in a very large country like India, I think that's a pretty big achievement. So what I would like to say is thank you to our alumni. Thank you. It's because of you that the school enjoys the reputation that it does. So thank you very much for the success that you bring. I'd also like to really, my sincere gratitude to you, Amish Tripathi. I know him from his books. It was wonderful actually seeing you in person. I had a little bit of a fan moment. I did tell him I really enjoyed the Shiva trilogy, So thank you, Amish, and the Nehru Center for your graciousness in helping us organize this event. It is thanks to people like you that ISB has grown to what it is today. It's thanks to generosity of supporters like you. Thank you again to everyone here to celebrate the milestone. And I think you have next, you're in for a treat. You have Subbu. When I say that we as a school, we partner with the government, I can't think of a more a person who exemplifies it more than Subbu. So we loaned him to the government for 3 years. They loved him so much, he came back. Within a few months, they've asked for him back. So I just spoke to him today and I said, Subbu, I hope you're still only going on leave because you're still ours, You're not the government of India, you're still ours. So with that, thank you very much. Welcome. And thank you for celebrating this wonderful event with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madan. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation of the State of the School report. I now invite Shri Sunil Kant Munjal, Chairman, Hero Enterprises, and also founding member of the ISB Executive Board, to say a few words on this occasion.
Lies, damned lies, and statistics is the way the subject often gets introduced. And by the way, people use this all the time. Institutions, to express where they stand, use lots and lots of figures. And they are as confusing as they're revealing. But the interesting thing with this school is that for 7 years, the first 7 years, ISB refused to present itself for any ranking. And the reason was, we only want to stand up and be counted when we are ready, when we genuinely stand where we believe we ought to. So, Madan, this is not new. So the habit of the school to earn all kinds of credits and kudos is not new. It's happened from the beginning. But because the very idea was to focus, and Madan stole my lines, was to focus on excellence all the time in every aspect. I remember the early days when Rajat and Anil and Pramath and all were running around, literally scrambling across the globe, looking for support, looking for ideas, looking for people to get involved and engaged. And they had a very compelling pitch, very simple, but very compelling, that we'd like to make an institution which is the best of the best. How can you actually argue with that? And that brought in some of the best of the best from industry to get involved with the founding and with the board of the ISB. And it was not just from India. There was a separate board set up of global leaders, and that list of each one reads like a who's who of their respective fields. The many deans who have been with us, starting with Sumantra, by the way. Sumantra was like a thunderstorm. He was not just a presence. You could feel him coming from a distance. We unfortunately lost him too early, and that's when Pramod took on the responsibility. We've had a series of outstanding individuals who've led this institution as chairs, as board members, as visiting faculty, as advisors and guides. But the most enduring value, the measure, and the way the people outside look at the school is through you. Is the product of the school, is the alums. And for us too, this is the true test as to what happens to you from when you come in, the first day when you walk in, and when you leave, when you graduate from the institution. What do you do outside? What do you do with your lives? What do you do with the jobs? What do you do with people around you? And the success there is not measured only in monetary terms. It is, of course, important to get recognized by designations. But to my mind, it's a lot more important to understand and to see what people around you say about you. How do you deal with people? I think that's a real test. Of course, you will learn econometrics and you learn management techniques and you learn all of the fancy terms and jargon. But what matters is what you do every day to get to that long-term goal. So it's not just the goal, it's the journey which I think is as important. And ISB has a wonderful way of infusing this. It's almost magic because it's only a one-year program. By the way, there have been lots and lots of discussion about the length of the program, because in reality, it's not a one-year program. It's a lot more just packed into 1 year. Would you agree? Because I've heard this more than once, that you get no time to lift up your head and have the amount of fun you would like. Of course you have fun, but you probably like to have a little bit more when you're in the school. So I think this is a unique experiment, and by the way, it is an experiment because it is unlike anything else in the country. And there are very few like this in the world. Because in the early days, when it was being set up, this is one of the conversations we used to have. What is it you're trying to emulate? Where do you learn from? So we looked at some of the best. The more interesting conversation was actually when we did the second one. Three of us, Analjeet, Sunil Mittal and myself, we were standing in the Prime Minister's office in Delhi. And his principal secretary, who happened to be a friend of ours because he used to be Chief Secretary of Punjab at one time. And all three of us at some point originally come from Punjab. So he's saying, since all three of you are here together, can you come to my room? I want to have a conversation with you. So we said, of course. So he says, why don't you guys do something in Punjab? I said, what's wrong with you? Do you know what all we do in Punjab? He's saying, I know, but can you do a little more? I said, we have 30,000 kids studying in our schools. We have a B.Ed college, M.Ed college, medical college, nursing college, hospital. And I just read out the whole list to him, other than businesses, by the way, because he was not talking about business. And he's saying, yeah, but there's a unique opportunity. The Prime Minister has just come back from Mohali and announced a complete education city in one of the sectors in Mohali. We have a plan to put up a business school there. And they had spoken, they had approached the Ministry of Labor and HR. By the way, the business schools, the IIMs, do not come under an education ministry, interestingly. And he's saying they've said no, they're very busy, they're doing what they're doing. Why don't you guys grab this opportunity? Why don't you put up a business school here? And we all looked at each other, and without a word, by the way, we said, okay, we will certainly consider it. We will most likely do it. So we walked out of this room, and all three of us said, what the hell are we committing? You know, a business school is a serious commitment. And all of us run a variety of not-for-profits. But what he's talking about is something truly special. So we started talking to institutions around the world to see if we could bring in a partnership. We spoke with one, then a second, then a third, and a fourth. When we spoke to Jagmohan Raju at Wharton, so Jagmohan was an old friend. He's saying, look, we already have a partnership with ISB. It is highly unlikely that Wharton's board will permit us to do a second one here. Two of you are already on the board of ISB. Why don't you just do another ISB? So interestingly, by the way, people point a finger and blame us. Jagmohan is the one to blame, actually. So we said, actually, that sounds like a good idea. So we took the idea back to the next board meeting at ISB in Hyderabad. And there was some to and fro. And finally, we decided that we will do the second campus. It was not a long time since the first one had come up. And we will add something extra. So the question was, we are doing what we are doing in Hyderabad. It has wonderful momentum. It was, of course, struggling in those days. By the way, it's had lots of ups and downs in the early days, especially on the financials, because there's a massive spend. Just the capex to put up something like this is huge, and you all know what the facilities are like. And operating cost is not low either. While the fee was kept at about a pretty high level by Indian standards, very low by global standards, it was still a struggle in the early days. And so the question was, so they said, then you guys have to put up all the money if you want to do this. And by that time, Mickey Punj of Punj Lloyd also got engaged. And so four of us together said, this has to become at least as good as Hyderabad, if not better. So we said, what is it you can do? So each one of us took the responsibility of putting up an additional institute at the campus, which you all know, of course, the Bharati School for Public Policy and the Max School for Healthcare and Healthcare Management and Punj Lloyd School for Infrastructure and the Munjal School for Global Manufacturing. Each of them, in their own way, added something which had never been done on any campus of any business school in the world. There was a bit of flutter in the early days. We said, are we taking on too much? But the moment we started talking to people outside, they said, this would give you a unique strength, because each of these is a crying need, not just of India, but of literally each and every developing economy across the globe. So you can provide expertise to the world as well. And Hyderabad was designed as an open platform to bring in the best in the world. So this gave us an additional fillip. So this has been an amazing journey. And Madan was right when he says the board has constantly pushed for the institution to look forward at the next horizon and the next horizon. Because this is not a race you want to stop at any time soon. You want to keep going. And as I said, it is important that we enjoy the journey as much as we are looking at a long-term horizon, which will be hopefully a phenomenal and a fantastic goal. Because while it's number one in India, I'll repeat the words Madan said, it is not good enough. We have to do more. We have to get better. We have to improve our reach. We have to improve our research. We have to improve overall the ecosystem in which it operates, including helping many, many more become entrepreneurs, getting engaged and involved in new ideas, in innovation, in research, and truly serving the needs of society and the world. So many, many congratulations to each and every one of you. Many congratulations to everyone at ISB. We see the celebrities, we see the big faculty. There are many others, faceless, nameless, who are working tirelessly to make sure everything works, everything runs. The dining, the cleanliness, the operation, the maintenance. So I'd like to say a big thank you today to all of them for the amazing work that they do to allow us to take credit for the work that they do. So thank you all very much. Many congratulations and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Munjal. I now invite Shri Amish Tripathi, Director of the Nehru Center, to say a few words, please.
Namaste everyone, welcome to the Nehru Center. Regrettably, I did not do my MBA at ISB because I did my MBA before ISB was formed. I did it from IIM Calcutta, batch 95 to 97. So let me talk about something that is common between ISB and IIM Calcutta, between the Indian School of Business and the Indian Institute of Management. India, the country that we all love, a rising tide lifts all boats. It is one of the most exciting times to be born an Indian, one of the most exciting times in many centuries to be born an Indian. And I thought, how about if I summarize what's happening with India through the tale of our primary three goddesses. We are among the last surviving goddess worshipping cultures. So how about if we approach what's happening with India through the way we worship Goddess Lakshmi, Goddess Shakti, and Goddess Saraswati. So the first, Goddess Lakshmi. 1947, we were left in a pretty bad state by the British Raj, but regrettably we chose socialism after that, which has an unparalleled track record of economic destruction wherever it has been tried. And so we regrettably continued our descent, even post-independence. We woke up in 1991, and that's when it started changing. And once the dead hand of socialism was removed, the entire world understood we Indians know how to worship Goddess Lakshmi. This year, our GDP will cross the GDP, or in fact it already has, the GDP of our former colonial master, the UK. We know how to worship Goddess Lakshmi. Indians in the UK form approximately 1.5% of the population. We contribute 6% of the UK's GDP. We know how to worship Goddess Lakshmi. Just the dead hand of socialism has to be removed. We are good at it. How about Goddess Shakti? There is, I am a diplomat, you are in a diplomatic institution, you're technically on Indian soil, so I'll have to be a little careful with my words on this, but there is a certain neighboring country of ours, a certain authoritarian communist country, which is a source of dismay and trouble to many countries across the world. We're the only ones who've actually fought them in the last few years. We pushed them back. We know how to fight. We know how to worship Goddess Shakti as well. Our army, our armed forces, even in peacekeeping services across have conducted themselves with honor. And even when we have fought back wars, such as in Kargil, we all know that there were Pakistani soldiers out there who'd come in the garb of non-state actors. And after many years, they did acknowledge that they were Pakistani soldiers. But they refused to take, many don't know this, they refused to take the bodies back of the Pakistani soldiers who our soldiers killed. But our army is an honorable army. We did the final rites for those soldiers, even when their own did not accept them back. And that's what Goddess Shakti would expect of us. We know how to fight, but we know how to worship her in an honorable way. We are good at that as well. Let's come to the last one, worshipping Goddess Saraswati. the domain of knowledge, the domain of culture. We are good at absorbing knowledge that comes, that has been generated across the world. There are companies across the world where we become CEOs. There are B schools, engineering colleges in India, which are very good at absorbing the knowledge that has been generated in the West and disseminating it and using it. But let's be honest, we haven't generated as much knowledge as our ancestors did relative to the rest of the world. There are 3 million Sanskrit manuscripts that survive till today, ancient handwritten Sanskrit manuscripts. That's more than the rest of the ancient world combined. That's how kick-ass our ancestors were in knowledge production. That's an area perhaps we need to become better at. We are good at absorbing knowledge. Are we truly generating knowledge as our ancestors did? We are a culture that is economically and seen across the world and academically as good achievers, but is our culture actually impacting the outside world as well? Perhaps we have started impacting, but maybe not as well as we could. So how about if we focus, and we should continue to worship Goddess Lakshmi, we do need that, and Goddess Shakti, we need our protection, but how about if we improve the way we worship Goddess Saraswati as well? One of the things I love most about ISB, as compared to many other B schools, very good at research, very good at knowledge production. Our institutions need to do that a lot more. That's a thought I want to leave with you guys, and pleasure having you here. Thank you. And of course, I get to invite my friend Subbu up on stage to deliver his remarks, who also is fortunately a fellow IIM Calcutta alum. I'm claiming him.
A very good evening, everyone. And thanks to the Nehru Center, very good friend and senior of mine from IIM Calcutta, Amish, for organizing this event and giving me the opportunity to share. I think, let me confess that at the end of the presentation, you might think that because we are seniors, we actually had a conversation about what we're going to talk. But let me confess, he spoke independently and I'm going to speak independently mine, but it's in some sense what I'm going to speak about. The preambling for that has been done wonderfully well by Amish. So let me, before I speak on what I think is a very important part where we can indeed worship Goddess Saraswati. And I think he said it absolutely right, that compared to our ancestors who were indeed kick-ass in worshipping Ma Saraswati and creating knowledge, we haven't done enough. And my talk will be therefore on that broad topic. But let me just quickly, given that this is such a wonderful occasion to celebrate ISB, let me share my own perspective. Maybe it's coincidental, but the idea of ISB, when it germinated, was the time when the idea of me getting involved in ISB also germinated. I still recall, I'd gotten admitted to the PhD program. This was in the year 2001. And I read a news clipping saying that there's going to be a research institution that's going to start in India. So I read that news clipping and showed it to my dad, to my father, and told him that I'll come back to this institution. This was in 2001 because I had my sights very clearly that I was coming back to India. I think what Madan shared, the ability to sort of relate. I'll just mention an anecdote. I still remember this very well. To be able to sort of in the class give examples and anecdotes. The particular batch, so I have this tendency to use examples from Bollywood and cricket in class, and so I don't remember which batch it was, but on the first class I actually mentioned I was giving, I'd given maybe a few examples, maybe one too many from Bollywood and cricket. So there's this, smart kid, and some of them, really push you, and especially in the first class. So this kid says, Prof, are you going to also give us pre-reads on Bollywood and cricket? Now, as you would imagine, that had me stumped. I hadn't certainly prepared for that, but thankfully I gathered my wits and I then retorted back and said that, my dear friend, if you need pre-reads on cricket and Bollywood, the women here, watch out, this is not the guy to hang around with. But I think the ability to relate, I think, is something that I've thoroughly enjoyed. I've been here at ISB since 2010. I visited in 2009. So I've been there for 12 years. And I must mention that, for instance, Madan spoke about me going on leave. I genuinely am indebted to this institution because, I always wanted to come back to a research-driven institution. With all due respects to my alma mater, the IIM Calcutta, which trained me. But it's good to be there as a student, but I'm not quite sure I would have gone there as a faculty. I certainly have come back to ISB and I've thoroughly enjoyed being there as a faculty, continue to be there as well. So that's, I think, is if we are voting with our feet, I have certainly voted with my feet. Being there in ISB just tells how well the institution has taken care of me, has given me the opportunities to actually contribute to the nation. So what I'm going to share is I thought this is a good point to look at the long run. Those of you who've been watching the Indian economy during the COVID period, and those of you who follow me on social media, Twitter or LinkedIn, would have seen some of my presentations. India has been the positive outlier in its COVID policy, and having been at the thick of things there. We were the only country which actually recognized that COVID is going to be a huge supply side shock, and therefore implemented supply side measures. And even on the demand side, we were far more careful and did, rather than just giving $5,000 checks that even kids at the University of Chicago get. And, I say that from experience. Instead of that, we actually did very well targeted spending. I've written about this in Times of India and other outlets. Please do go and check there. So I don't want to actually speak about that, but I think the fact that the rest of the world can learn from India's economic policy during COVID is, I think, a signal that things are changing. Gone are the days when those of us who basically are educated in English in particular would bend down every time we basically saw someone from the advanced economy and said, that person knows more than me. No. I think times are changing, and I want to set the perspective by taking on cue what Amish spoke about, what our ancestors created. And therefore, I think, especially among the group of us who speak English, who are trained in English, I think it's imperative that we Indianize Indian thought. And that's what my talk is going to be about. I don't think there can be a better blessing to give to Ma Saraswati, than really focus on Indianizing Indian thought. So why is this important? This research that was actually done, Pew Research, looked at the attitudes to religion across the world, showed that I think here India is a particular outlier. 97% Indians believe God is important in their life. This is significantly lower for the advanced economies. For the other economies, this is around, the percentages are anywhere between 50 to 60%. Some countries even lower than that. But India, 97%. And this is still when India has just crossed the colonial masters to become the 5th largest economy in the world. Next slide. Can I have a clicker, please? Yeah. Is this the one? Okay, so if you look at, and this is not driven by a particular religion. If you look across religions, I think it's common that, the number of, or percentage of Indian adults who actually believe in religion, that's where India is very different. Next slide. Keep going. Yeah, you can look across the religions, actually, it's true. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, I'd really prefer actually controlling it myself. Yeah. This salient difference for India vis-a-vis the West, I don't think is a function of material prosperity, because historically, even times when India was a prosperous nation, and I will talk about that, even then India always believed in, in religion. And if you look at, Sanatan Dharma, the term in Sanskrit itself translates as basically Sanatan is something that has always been there. There's no beginning, there's no end. It's a way of life. Dharma as actually as a way of life, not in a very insular religious institution. It's a way of life, not dogmas that change with material prosperity. So question that arises, and having written the economic survey that that I feel very privileged to have contributed to, that ethical wealth creation should be the way for India to actually become a prosperous entity. I think the question that has always I've struggled with, especially given some of the people whom I have actually benefited from their advice during my PhD programs, etc., is should the economic policy, or should economics itself, should that be separate from the rest of the world? Now, it's quite common why, if you look at, among many educated Indians, we tend to sort of be very, very idolatory towards the West. And that's not, that's not unanticipated, that's not surprising, when yeah, my train of thought breaks when you actually speak, sorry. Yeah. So, where was I? I was talking about the fact that, can you just go back to that previous slide? Yeah. So, when we look at, those of us who are, who've been educated in English in particular, we tend to be very, very idolatory towards, Western ideas. And I think that's not unexpected, especially, when you see material prosperity, and that material prosperity has indeed been there for the last, couple of centuries, you do think that maybe they are doing something is right about that, maybe they are doing something right, and therefore it's alluring to actually think that whatever a more prosperous society does might be the right thing to do. And therefore, this is sort of the right moment for us to start thinking about these questions. But I think, as Amish was also saying, possibly the only surviving civilization. And therefore, our cultures actually far, far predate, many of us. Can economic development be contrary to, to India's DNA? I think this is a question that is extremely important. In which case, then the question arises is, what is India's DNA, and how do we relate, to some of the debates about secularism, et cetera, that we are having. So, if we move on, this is a slide. This was the first chart in the economic survey on ethical wealth creation, drawn from Angus Madison's work. Most of us actually think that the West has always been prosperous, and that therefore, ideas from the West are the ones that should be copy-pasted onto India. But I think when we take a much longer expanse of history, I think that is quite important. I want you to focus on that space shown in yellow, which is India, and I've marked that with the arrow. Now, the scale on the x-axis here is not linear. That first unit is just 1,000 years, 1 to 1,000. The rest of them actually is covering another 1,000 years. But what is critical is, if you observe until 1750 AD, that's 3/4 of known economic history. 3/4 of known economic history, India was by far the leading economic power in the world. And till about 1080, in fact, had a much higher GDP per capita as well. Some people who actually want to more hang on to this notion that the West was always better will say, oh, it is because of the population. But we have to recognize that in those times, people would move to geographies where prosperity was higher. So population itself was endogenous, and therefore you can't dismiss population, and say this is not important. So up until 1758, 3/4 of known economic history, India was the by far the leading economic power. Accounted for more than 1/3 of world's GDP consistently. Just as a comparison, because it always helps to actually think or use contemporary benchmarks. Let's take the United States, which has been the leading economic power in the world. How long has the United States been this leading economic power? About half a century. Has accounted for about, at its peak, a little more than 1/3 of world's GDP, but on average, about 27-28%. Just imagine, India was the leading economic power for 17.5 centuries. That is 35 times longer than what we would basically, associate as the leading economic power, the ones that we associate the best economic ideas with. 35 times longer. In other words, there is something there, and let's acknowledge that kind of dominance cannot just be pure happenstance. That kind of dominance had to come because of the quality of ideas that led to the dominance. So there is something there which we as Indians for sure will benefit from by actually studying what is it that led to that, that kind of dominance. And that is what I want to intend, and that's, this keynote is focused on that, so that we actually have the long run vision, really start thinking about, what is it that led to that kind of dominance. And I'm going to give you some glimpses of what I think. Actually, this is an ongoing, project where eventually culminating in a book. But I think this is very important for institutions like ISB, its alumni, its faculty to think about. Let's move on. So, because economics in any society can never be departed from its sociology, and in fact, if you go and read Arthashastra, or if you read, in the language that I speak, Tamil, Tiruvalluvar, Saint Tiruvalluvar, in Tirukkural, wrote about this 3,500 years back. Each one of those philosophers always wrote about the economic aspects after talking about the society as well. So I think it's very important for us to not depart the economics from its sociology. So I'm going to give you some some thoughts on why I think what India's DNA was. It was a DNA that basically led to creativity and liberalism. Liberalism, but seen in not necessarily in the blinkers that we have in today's milieu, but liberalism as basically just open-mindedness. And that's what led to that was what was underlying its economic thought. That liberalism led to tolerance, in turn to enormous creativity and prosperity, which I've already mentioned. Next slide. So let me first talk about liberalism and tolerance. Move on. Many of us would have heard this particular expression, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, being told. The origin of this comes from the Maha Upanishads. The shloka that goes is, Ayam nijaha paro veti ganana laghu chetasam udara charitanam tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Ayam nijaha, this is mine, paro veti, that is not mine. Ganana laghu chetasam, ganana is basically calculation. That's the kind of calculation that is made by a small-minded person. Ganana laghu chetasam. Udara charitanam tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Udara charitam, consciousness that actually is broad. For them, the entire world is a family. If there is an idea that I think is all-encompassing, and liberal, I think this indeed captures that. Indeed, if you go and read the Garuda Purana, there is where actually, the Indian prayers have never been about, help my community, help my, particular clique. No, it's always been for world peace, world prosperity. Sarvesham mangalam bhuyat, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kashchit dukkha bhag bhavet. Next slide. And I think the pinnacle of this comes from the Bhagavad Gita. 18 chapters of a conversation between two sakhas. In the 18th chapter, after having explained, the three ways, Bhakti Marga, the Gyan Marga, the Karma Marga, all the intricacies and the details, at the end of that, and having given all the discourse, all the knowledge, then Sri Krishna says, Itite jnanam akhyatam guhyat guhyataram maya vimrishyaita sheshena yathechasi tathakuru. And I've actually highlighted the part which is actually important here. Yathechasi tathakuru. What you think, you act accordingly. Now imagine, this is whom we consider actually the sort of the divine. Even the divine is not saying, hey, thou have to actually act only in this manner. No, I've given you all the knowledge. I've given you the trade-offs. You act now the way you think is right. Yathechasi tatha kuru. I think if we reflect on this, this is indeed, sort of capturing that depth of liberal thought. Even God is not asking humans basically to say, you have to do this. He's asking humans to exercise discretion, vivek, and make a choice. Pinnacle of liberal thought. Next slide. What did this kind of liberal ideals that led to tolerance actually, manifested as in terms of creativity? I'm going to just give you a few examples. Let's start with these palindromic compositions are typically taken as sort of the pinnacle of creativity. This sentence, able was I saw Elba, is often quoted as a great example of a palindromic sentence. In English, it was created in the 19th century. Able was I saw Elba. Let's contrast that to a composition, in the 14th century. This is the Ramakrishna Viloma Kavyam by Surya Pandit, Devagya Surya Pandit. It's a 400-word palindromic composition in the 14th century. When you read it forward, it is the story of Ramayana. You read it backward, it is the story of, forward it's the story of Rama, backward is the story of Krishna. It's a 400-word, and there are examples that I've actually put out there. 400 words versus 6 words. Able was I saw Elba. And you can imagine that creating a palindromic composition, when you increase the number of words, the difficulty, the complexity just increases in a convex manner, not in a linear manner. 400 words versus 6 words. And look at the idea behind it as well. Able was I saw Elba is actually an innocuous, sentence, not very profound. In contrast, the two most iconic characters being captured in this composition, read forward Rama, read backward Krishna. I think if this is not creativity or the pinnacle of creativity, what else is? Next slide. Tirukkural, which I was very, very fortunate to be exposed to at a young age. Tiru is holy, Kural is concise. The beauty of Tirukkural is, if for instance I tell you, go and read shloka number 46, you will know it is in the 5th chapter. Why? Because every chapter has exactly 10 verses. Exactly 10 verses. And this is across almost 133 chapters. 1,330 couplets. Each of those couplets contains exactly 7 words. Exactly 7 words. Just imagine how difficult it would be to actually capture across 133 chapters, 1,330 couplets. Each of them 7 words exact. Starts with the first letter in Tamil, A, and ends with the last letter in Tamil, N. There are 3 parts to it. And so this is, 3,000 to 500 BC, 500 BC, so almost 3,500 years back. 3 parts which are basically called in Tamil, Arattupal, Porulpal, and Kamattupal. Pal in Tamil means essence. So it has the essence of all the virtues, of all the material prosperity, Porulpal, and desires, Kamattapal. And this tribute actually was a famous poet, Avvaiyar, talks about the Tirukural, and what she says is that Tiruvalluvar took wisdom equal to the water in the 7 seas and compressed it into a mustard seed. Imagine the entire water of the 7 seas getting compressed into a mustard seed. That's how profound this is. And not even from a literary perspective as well, such creativity. Again, I couldn't agree more with Amish that our ancestors did far, far better in terms of actually contribute, or were far, far, eligible worshippers of Ma Saraswati than we are. And I think we have to at least make an effort to reverse some of that during our lifetimes. Prosperity, and I think this is the most important part for me as a business school professor. Let's move on. I've already spoken about this, but let's look at what were the ideas that led to this prosperity. Next slide. This is the idea that we actually wrote about in the economic survey, that when you go and read the Arthashastra or go and look at what led to prosperity, it was indeed dharmic capitalism. It was through the marriage of the invisible hand of the market, a term that very eloquently was coined by Adam Smith. But the spirit of that existed in India long, long back. So, private enterprise or capitalistic model as captured by the invisible hand of the market, but married with the hand of ethics or dharma. And that's how the dharma, arth, kama, moksha, the 4 purusharthas, that are recommended in Vedanta, was actually taken care of as well. Next slide. When we look at the economic model itself, and I'll give you some glimpses of the economic model, this economic model actually stood on 5 pillars. Markets and private enterprise. So it's actually quite odd that India chose to go the socialistic model. It was, of course, in my opinion, and I could be speculating here, it was because of lack of adequate awareness of India's own history. The need to encourage wealth creation. Sri Suktam, for instance, which comes in the Rig Veda, Sri Suktam, it's a hymn to the goddess of wealth. We've not been a society that has actually shunned wealth. We've in fact, respected and paid obeisance to wealth. Socialism was actually just anathema to that entire idea. Sustainable growth, something that actually, especially in today's world of climate change, I think there are important ideas that can be borrowed from India's traditional thought. Respect of property rights, which is actually a very, very critical element of any capitalistic society. And ideas on state taxes and public goods, which was not rapacious. No, those ideas were not rapacious capitalism, as I'll give you examples of. Next slide. So, India's ideas actually, unfortunately, have not gotten as much attention. Some scholars have actually written about it, but typically these scholars have, maybe endogenously have been at the periphery, they haven't gotten the attention that they deserve. If you read Spengler, in 1971 book published by the Duke University Press, and I'm picking up a quote from his book, he says, it is in the Arthashastra by Kautilya that economic discussion was most highly developed, much more fully than one finds in classical Greek economics. And having had the privilege of learning the economic literature, I say it very, very responsibly, to me, the father of modern economics would possibly or would definitely be Adam Smith. But the father of economics is not Adam Smith, it is Kautilya. Spengler, writing on Kautilya, says that the root of wealth, and this I think just reflect on the ideas here, root of wealth is economic activity, and lack of it brings material distress. Absent fruitful economic activity, both current prosperity and future growth are in danger of destruction. And then, Kautilya exhorts the king to remove all obstructions to economic activity. What is the ease of doing business if not that? Removing obstacles to economic activity. Olivelle, in a 2013 book, published by the Oxford University Press, says Arthashastra as a treatise on economic policy was deeply influential in India till the 12th century. Some very powerful ideas were discarded after that. Next slide. A key contributor to India's prosperity was private enterprise. Internal and external trade was done through two major highways, the Uttara Patha and the Dakshina Patha. Ports connected India to Egypt, Rome, Greece, Persia, and Arabs to the west, and with China, Japan, and Southeast Asia to the east. My good friend and colleague in the North Block, Sanjeev, has written about this. Trade was carried out by large corporatized guilds that were akin to today's multinationals, funded by temple banks. And Arthashastra actually in chapter 16, Kautilya mentions the specific duties of the king's superintendent of commerce, which would actually be in today's day would be the minister of commerce. Mariners and merchants who import foreign merchandise shall be favored with remission of trade taxes so that they may derive profit. In fact, Kautilya, had the provision for those who wanted to, sell their foreign traders who want to sell their wares in India, for them to be given quarters as well to stay. So they were actually very welcome. Thus, commerce and wealth was intrinsic to India's DNA. Next slide. The importance, the emphasis on sustainable growth through dharmic capitalism. This was a very key, aspect of, because dharma received as much emphasis as artha. Artha as wealth, dharma, but ethics. And I think that is something which particularly becomes germane in business schools. Now we're actually, having classes on ethics. But I think the overall training right from the beginning on dharma was very important. Tiruvalluvar in Tirukkural actually talks about this, saying wealth yields righteousness and joy, the wealth acquired capably without causing any harm. I think climate change today would definitely be taken as, as economic activity that creates harm, that does not satisfy that particular principle of wealth being created without any harm. Public goods, externalities due to climate change, pollution, all of them are clearly included in that. And I think more mundanely, if you look at our own, homes, we often write Shubh Labh. If you go to the altar of a temple, in our homes, we write Shubh Labh. Nobody writes there Ashubh Labh or Shubh Hani. So the concept that, that doing good and thereby creating prosperity was intrinsic to our culture. Even Adam Smith, in fact, and this is, unfortunate that these ideas have been discarded. Adam Smith in the theory of moral sentiments actually says that to combine moral living and reasonable pursuit of material desires, not rapacious capitalism, not the credo of greed is good that the New York Times had very famously claimed in the New York Times in the 1980s. And it contrasts also to the value neutrality of modern economics, which I have a problem with. I think, if you go back to the Indian economic thought, it is not value neutral. It actually emphasizes very, very importantly, crucially, that values are important for the, for the hand of ethics to be strong. It's as if, think about, and this is the metaphor that I love giving students, that, if you have a river that is banked well, the water flows, and that water creates prosperity. That flow of water, that is basically the work of the invisible hand of markets. But those banks are that's the hand of ethics. When those banks fall off, water goes helter-skelter and just creates, a lot of destruction. Equally true for the economy as well. And I think global financial crisis and the Indian banking sector crisis itself is evidence of this. My advisor, Luigi Zingales, has done some work on the importance of trust and ethics and how that led to the entire global financial crisis. Next slide. I just mentioned some time back that the Sri Suktam in Rig Veda actually, Rig Veda, as you all know, is the oldest text known to mankind. In the Rig Veda itself, the prayer to goddess Lakshmi is very much there. Sri Suktam is a hymn to that goddess. Tirukkural speaks about it as well. I mentioned about that profit was never a dirty word. We used to write Shubh Labh in our homes. It was extremely unfortunate then to have the first Prime Minister of this country, of India, actually saying, never utter the word profit in front of me, it's a dirty word. It was never a dirty word in our culture. Strong property rights, and I think this is very important. If you look at the Western principle of eminent domain, that principle of eminent domain actually allowed governments to confiscate land from landowners. Eminent domain is a Latin phrase that means supreme lordship or ultimate sovereignty of God. And it is this principle that was used actually to be able to grab land. The king would grab land. Roman law and Magna Carta of 1215 CE recognized eminent domain for the state. This is at the root of rapacious behavior by the state, which today we all, economics and corporate governance scholars worry about. The Shukla Yajurveda, on the other hand, actually says even king must not appropriate others' wealth. Sage Narada and Narada Muni we all actually know about, or at least have heard stories about. In his Dharma Shastra, Narada Smriti says that the householder's living space and his field are considered as the fundamentals of his existence. This is talk of property rights, actually saying that his living space and his field are actually fundamental to his existence. Therefore, let not the king take either of them, for that is at the root of, that is the root of householder. And I think there are many examples of kings actually being exhorted to follow these principles as well. Next slide. Similarly, if you look at the Shanti Parva in the Mahabharata, this is book 12, chapter 8, there's the quote there, wealth brings about accession of wealth, the way domesticated elephants are used to capture wild elephants. This idea that capital can actually beget more capital was indeed captured there, saying wealth brings about accession of wealth, the way domesticated elephants are used to capture wild elephants. Look at the contrast. Aristotle, great scholar, I have a lot of respect for, but in this particular idea, there's a contrast. It says money is barren and cannot produce money. But we know today, from modern economics, that money actually can produce more money, and that is why the concept of time value of money. The grammarian Panini expressed interest payments in percentage terms in 700 BCE. In other words, the cost of capital and the fact that money itself can actually generate more money was part of the Indian economic thought. So capital and rental cost of capital were concepts that were part of the ancient Indian economic thought. Finally, state taxes and public goods. If you look at the Mahabharata, again, Shanti Parva, it says a king should tax his kingdom like a honey bee gathering honey from flowering plants. This is an idea where the state and the citizen are actually, are seen in symbiotic relationship. Honey going and plucking, honey basically, but at the same time also helping to with cross-pollination. And that is a symbiotic relationship. In a similar way, if you look at, Kalidasa in the Raghuvansham actually says the state collects taxes for the greater welfare of its citizens. So welfare policy through fiscal policy is also being talked about. In the same way as the sun evaporates water to form clouds, only to return it manifold in the form of rain. Contrast these ideas vis-a-vis Jean-Baptiste Colbert says the art of taxation consists in plucking the goose as to procure the highest quantity of feathers with the least possible hissing. Think that metaphor itself, that contrast in metaphors, one is about actually the state grabbing, another is about the state having a symbiotic relationship with its citizen. So the simile of plucking the goose is exploitative, while the simile of honeybee and cloud is actually one capturing the symbiotic relationship. Similarly, public goods were talked about. There is, going back to Mahabharata itself, when Narada Muni visits Yudhishthira, asks him about, have you created the tanks for water, public goods? And, Tirukkural also talks about it 3,500 years back. Next slide. When I look back, actually, and people will ask, why is it that if these ideas, such powerful ideas were there, why did we actually, become so poor? I think there's a reason, because we actually disbanded those ideas. Starting from the 12th century onwards, the influence of many of these powerful ideas actually started waning. In particular, during the British era, I think these ideas basically, especially the use of markets and private enterprise was really inhibited. It started with the 7 Years' War, culminating in the Battle of Plassey. That's when, if you start seeing, in Angus Madison's chart as well, India's real sort of sharp decline starts. Scholars who've been here, visited this nation, Dadabhai Naoroji and R.C. Dutt, have actually highlighted the inimical effects of abuse of markets. they said that British economic policies distorted markets. And I think this is further testimony to the importance of dharmic capitalism, of private enterprise. Saying, so he basically said that economic policies distorted markets in Britain's favor at India's expense. So, sometimes you find commentary saying that, the imperialism was basically the fact that we should not therefore have markets. That's the wrong interpretation. It was actually the undermining of markets or exploitation of markets to the benefit of, the colonial power that actually led to India's penury. Tariffs were imposed that favored British exports at the expense of Indian entrepreneurs. Artificial exchange rates, actually something that today we actually understand very well, had tilted the trades, the terms of trade towards Britain, and that's what eventually led to the degradation of value-added activities. From doing lots of value-added activities, then India became just an exporter of raw materials over time because of the undermining of markets and private enterprise. In fact, and that was not the end. On the one hand, they actually undermined markets, and to create so much penury, but at the same time also, appealed to markets conveniently when they had to. Faced with famine, they actually rationalized non-intervention. When they were intervening in these diabolical manners for so long, rationalized non-intervention, saying intervening would violate principles of free trade and free enterprise. Quite rich. I think people like Arvind Virmani, my predecessor in the North Bloc, has actually written about how India continued disastrously with the same ideas even after independence, and only after 1991 did we start actually worshipping goddess Lakshmi, and I think the benefits are very much there for all of us to see. Move on. So let me conclude by summarizing that it is very important for us to really think about the ideas that led to the kind of prosperity that made India, what it was. Up until 1750 AD, India was by far the most prosperous nation in the world. And a lot of the ideas that are today part of the economist toolkit were ideas that actually had been written about 3,000, 2,500, 2,000 years, back. And I think it is those ideas that actually led to such prosperity. So all of us who are privileged enough to receive this kind of education, to be in other countries, I think we have a duty, and I would actually capture that duty the best by quoting from Bhagavad Gita again, chapter 3, shloka 21. Yadyat acharati shreshtatah tat tat evetaro janah sayat pramanam kurute lokas tat anuvartate. Yadyat acharati shreshtatah. Shresht is basically the privileged, people like us. The way we behave, Yatyat acharati shreshtatah tat tat evetaro janah. That's how people who are not as privileged as us, they actually follow us. So it behooves us to actually behave in a way that we inspire them positively. Part of the reason why actually I chose this topic, and on my Twitter, LinkedIn accounts, etc., I really try to propagate Indian ideas, is because, the Almighty has given me that privilege to be able to influence at least a couple of people positively. I do not want to continue influencing them saying the Western ideas are great, keep following them. So, yadyat acharati shreshtatah tat tat evetaro janah sayat pramanam kurute. And it's not, talk is cheap, talk is not enough. So, yadyat sayat pramanam kurute. In other words, the proof of behavior, sayat pramanam kurute lokas tat anuvartate. It's not enough just to talk. The actions have to actually back that talk as well, walk the talk. So, I would end my talk, and I appreciate your patience, with a humble prayer that as Indians, especially as Indians that have been privileged to actually receive the kind of education that puts us in a place like here, it is our responsibility to actually really propagate Indian ideas. And one is not asking for propagation of any ideas that are not there. These are all ideas that are very much there. I think it is just representation of what is indeed, India's contribution to the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Subbu, for that brilliant exposition. I think there's so much that you packed in the last 30, 40 minutes, when you spoke about the Tirukural, sort of bringing in knowledge from seven seas into a small, tiny mustard seed. I think what you tried to do was somewhat similar to try and get us sort of a master class. I want to thank you again very much for doing this. In the normal course of our program, as you know, this would have just followed with this brilliant panel that we had with Amish, Subbu, and Mr. Munjal. However, we've just received news a few minutes ago, and I'm sure some of you have seen it on your phones as well, that the Queen died this afternoon. There's been an official announcement by the royal family. I just want to read out the announcement. It says, the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen concert will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. So as a result of this, we will not be continuing with the sort of program anymore. I would request all of us to, stand to sort of observe a minute's silence. Thank you. I want to read out a message from the Honorable Prime Minister, who says, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II will be remembered as a stalwart of our times. She provided inspiring leadership to her nation and people. She personified dignity and decency in public life. I'm pained by her demise. My thoughts are with her family and people of the UK in this sad hour. May I also offer our condolences to our friends from this country and Sir Dominic and everybody else who's here. Thank you very much. And with that, we'll end this program. Thank you for joining us this evening. To all those of you who are joining us online, thank you very much for joining us as well. Thank you.